So hello, good evening, welcome to Aro Ling Cardiff. This evening Ngakpa ö-Dzin is teaching and he is going to talk to us about the vehicles.
Indeed, good evening. So in Sanskrit, vehicles are called yana, and you may be familiar with that word coming up in words like Sutrayana, Vajrayana. So that means vehicle, and that is tegpa in Tibetan. And it's quite important to understand the idea of yanas as it helps to make sense of a lot of the structure of the teachings within Buddhism. And a yana is something that has a base, a path, and a fruit. Somewhere that it starts, and somewhere that it ends in terms of the result, and a path between the two of them that is really congruent with both ends. It makes sense at both ends of the path. And this is not anything particularly obscure or unusual, because this happens in daily life anyway. It's not just a peculiar invention of Buddhism. Anything that we want to achieve in life is going to have a place where we start, some sort of process that we follow, and a result at the end of it. And it could be anything out in our lives. And we have all followed some kind of path from beginning to end in order to get where we are today. So a simple example would be if, for whatever reason, you wanted to travel to Llandyssil in West Wales, which you might want to do at some point. There will be a place where you can start on that journey. There'll be some sort of vehicle and some sort of road that takes you along that journey, and in the end you'll pop up somewhere in the vicinity of Llandyssil and Drandajong. Now, if you happen to live in Cardiff, then your vehicle of choice might be the T1C bus that leaves from the centre of town at about 4:45 in the evening, most evenings, not guaranteed. And that's been very useful. But there's a slight problem. What if you don't live in Cardiff? What do you do then? Well, if you happen to live in Wuppertal or thereabouts, then the T1C bus is of no use to you at all. I don't think so anyway.
Well, not till you get to Cardiff.
But you might possibly want to catch a plane from Dusseldorf, and you might either land in London or you might land in Cardiff. I don't know what they're doing these days. So inherent in the idea of getting yourself to exactly the same place is a contradiction. The vehicle will be different. Not only is this not a surprise to anyone, it's actually essential. If you're starting from a different point, even if your destination is identical, your vehicle, your path will be quite different. So the T1C bus is of no use to you. The plane from Dusseldorf may or may not be of use to you. You may have other routes that you need to take. So we're quite used to the idea of paths contradicting each other. Now, there's also a bit of a problem if you wanted to catch the plane from from Dusseldorf, even if that is your nearest and best vehicle, because it may so happen that you don't actually live at the airport. So the base for your vehicle, the starting point of that vehicle, is Flughafen Dusseldorf. You're not there. What do you do? Well, fortunately, Buddhism has an answer for that. And this is called a nundro, which literally means before going. And this is some way, some preliminary practice that gets you to the base of that vehicle, that gets you to a place you can start on that vehicle, on that journey. Now, for the fortunate people of Wuppertal, this might mean a trip on this Schwebebahn. I don't know how all these things link up, or you might have to get another bus or another train. But this will be your nundro to get you to Dusseldorf.
You notice how Ngakpa carefully avoids the word car.
That's a vehicle that rarely occurs to me.
Ngakpa doesn't like cars very much.
Go public transport every time. Or maybe feet. But yes, walking to Landusel is probably on most of us. So yes, if you don't live at the airport, you have a nundro. That nundro will hopefully get you to the right place. And nundros themselves will be different. We can't be in Cardiff being in awe of the people who have to use the Schwebebahn, wonderful though it is. It's of no use to us in Cardiff. And if you happened to live at the airport, you wouldn't want that nundro either. It'd be a complete waste of time because you're already at the base of that vehicle. So it's an expedient thing. A nundro will help you get to the base of your preferred vehicle. Now, as I say, this is not anything too obscure or difficult to understand, but I thought it'd be worth giving a really mundane example like this, just to establish some of the principles. What you might want to be doing is you might want to become an expert violinist, you might want to become a bricklayer, you might want to be a fluent speaker of the Welsh language. It could be anything. And it's a case of finding what vehicle is going to get you to that destination. So you find something that is congruent with where you happen to be, although you might need to do some preliminary work in order to be at the base of your chosen vehicle, and it's something that connects you to your destination. So those are the basic principles of the approach to making use of a jhana. So now we'll look at jhanas in a Buddhist context. And I remember when I first came across this idea, and I would say it was almost a shock to me, because I arrived at Buddhism from Catholicism, and I brought a lot of Catholicism with me. And in most religions, there's a sense of what's true, and what's true is fixed and you don't mess about with it. So whatever you learn to be true in that religion, that's always the way of it. Now, Buddhism isn't a religion that's a religion of truth. It's a religion of method. So instead of a truth that we have to believe in, or even a truth that we have to aim to believe in or aim to reach, there are methods, and those methods are connected with how we find ourselves and lead to realization in terms of an understanding of reality and an understanding of ourselves. And I was talking with Ngakpa Rinpoche, and he was talking about the vehicles, and it suddenly occurred to me, we're changing what we're talking about here. And I said to him, can you do that? And he said, yes, that's how it works. So a vehicle may say there are or are not awareness beings. You practice with awareness beings, or you practice with mantra, or you don't. One vehicle will say, no, you don't do that. Another vehicle will say, yes, you do. And that came as a shock to me, and it seemed a bit like cheating, that you could actually change the starting point, and it felt like you were changing what truth was. But as Buddhism isn't a religion of truth, what you're actually doing is you're changing the method. So what we'll look at now is the yanas according to the traditions of Himalayan Buddhism, just to have an overview of what they look like. Yes, please.
So we're going to share screen now.
Thank you. I hope that's
I'll just put us back on video.
I hope that's readable for everyone. I was going to be looking at that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right, thank you. So first of all, need to establish some principles behind this. And I'll say a little bit about some of the words you're seeing on the screen there. You have words like Hinayana and Mahayana, and these are words that describe a scope of practice, where Hinayana is, theoretically at least, a vehicle of small scope, a vehicle of personal liberation. That is the motivation behind it. Now, it's said that nobody actually practices like that these days, but
so you're starting at the bottom.
I'll be starting at the bottom, yes. And Mahayana is a vehicle of greater scope, where the practice motivation is in terms of the realization of everyone and everything everywhere. Also,
may I just ask, these columns are complete, they don't relate across to each other. I beg your pardon.
I will come to that in a minute. I just wanted to establish some of the vocabulary first.
Right.
But remind me if I forget.
Okay.
So we also have words like Sutra Tantra and Dzogchen, and the principles behind those are with Sutra. It's a practice of it's a vehicle of renunciation, where there's a sense of, in terms of emotional agitation, we are actually renouncing the causes of that. Any sort of undue emotional energy is renounced, and anything that appears to be causing that is renounced. So there's a sense there of calming everything down. With Tantra, we don't do that. We make use of the energy that we have, and we transform it into its realized quality. Now, it's said that Sutra is a slow path and a steady path, and one that's not quite so risky. Tantra is a faster path, but carries some risk with it, because if we misunderstand the sense of transforming the energy of our emotions, it can seriously lead us astray. And another word that you'll see on the screen is Dzogchen. Dzogchen is the vehicle of immediate self-liberation, in that when whatever arises is liberated in the moment of its arising. This is another vehicle. It's a vehicle that's potentially immediate in its effect, but it's also something that could be misunderstood. So this starts to put some of these vehicles in context in terms of the approaches of the traditions of Himalayan Buddhism. Now, as Ngakpa mentioned, there is actually a slight relationship, crossways between the traditions, in that we've placed the lower scope, or the apparently slower vehicle, towards the bottom of the screen, and roughly speaking, going across the screen, you'll find the tantric practices roughly in line with each other, but it's not actually possible to square them off one for one. So this is only a rough arrangement, just to give you some idea of where they sit with each other. Now, so to begin with the Gelugpa, I'm actually beginning with the most recent school of Tibetan Buddhism, but it's a useful place to begin. The Gelugpa have two vehicles in their explanation. You have the Hinayana, which we've already mentioned, but when we were practicing as part of a Gelugpa group, Hinayana wasn't really there as something anybody practiced. But this view of these two vehicles tells you that the base of the practice within the Gelugpa school is sutra, even though the yana that I've labeled as Mahayana there includes tantric practice. You can't start there. So as I said before, a vehicle has to have a base, a path, and a fruit. And this block of color under Gelugpa is one vehicle. So in order to...
I don't know if you can see my mouse, but we're talking about this section here.
Yes. So in order to begin with the Gelugpa practices, even the ones that lead you towards tantric practice, you have to begin with sutra. Now, this is the reformation of Lama Tsongkhapa, whose approach was that people needed the groundedness that sutra gives you before even considering moving on to the tantric practice. So sutra is called the exoteric Mahayana, which means the sort of more external Mahayana practices. And then as you move through that vehicle, you move into the outer tantras, which is part of esoteric Mahayana, and eventually to the inner tantras. So, and then finally on to Tantric Mahamudra. I won't go into any detail on that, just to say that the outer tantras concern themselves with purification practice. The inner tantras concern themselves more with being able to arise as the awareness being. So this is one approach to the vehicles.
So in the Gelug, because it's very much based in Sutrayana, is the language very sutric, and the approach to Tantra still very sutric?
Yes, it tends to be that way, that the language of practice is based in Sutra, as well as the practices themselves having to start there. there are a lot of sutric teachings, even though it's not as if you have to complete everything. We did actually engage in outer tantric practices while we were with the Gelugpa, without necessarily having to come to some final realization in terms of sutra, but sutra was very much the base. If we move on to the Kagyu and Sakya school, which are the other two of the Sama or newer schools of Tibetan Buddhism, you can move into Mahayana, which are the sutric practices, but you'll notice that Vajrayana is now a vehicle in its own right. So you can, within the Kagyu and Sakya schools, begin with Vajrayana, begin with tantric practice. But you can see from this, though, that the beginning point of the outer tantras. So this means that you would begin by being concerned with practices of purification, practices where the awareness being was fairly remote, on high, different to you, from whom blessings could be received. And the practices within Kriya Upa and Yoga Tantras may include practices to do with washing, general cleanliness, and being careful about what you eat, how you deal with your practice books, how you deal with your general environment. And there's a certain sense of precision that comes in as a result of that. And you move through that before you approach the Anatara Yoga Tantra practices. After that, it's possible to move into formless Mahamudra, which has some relationship with Dzogchen in terms of being a path where realization can be instantaneous. So that's the approach of the Kagyu and Sakya schools. Now, we come from the Nyingma school, and we come from the Aro tradition, which is based in Dzogchen and in the tantric vehicles of the Nyingma tradition. So I will go into detail as regards the 9 vehicles in another teaching, but I just wanted to show this as show the 9 vehicles because they are individual vehicles, and because they're individual vehicles, you can start with any one of them. So Hatha Yoga is, in terms of the Nyingma Tantras, the equivalent of Dzogchen. You could start there. Or you could start with the other Aina Tantras, which are Mahayoga and Ana Yoga. It's theoretically possible to start with the outer Tantras, but within the Aro itself, it's mostly concerned with the inner Tantras and Dzogchen, so the outer Tantras don't tend to be taught. It's also the case that the outer Tantras, with the awareness being quite remote from oneself, a pure being, and oneself not being quite pure, for people in the West, this is a view that they may have left behind in terms of the view of God and of Jesus in Christianity. So it may not be a useful approach for people to return to that view when they enter into Buddhism. But all of these vehicles are available as starting points.
May I ask why Kriya Tantra isn't blue?
Because I wanted to make the tantras different colors from each other, and I picked blue as being the middle-ish one of them, and alongside tantra on the Dzogchen side. There is no great meaning to these colors.
Okay, cool.
I was going for pastel so that the words would show up and being different from each other, and that's about it.
Okay, so these are actually different blues, are they?
Yes, they are.
They don't really show up on the screen.
Okay, so just imagine that every horizontal line within the various traditions is a demarcation of a different vehicle. It will have its own base, its own path, and its own fruit. Might be worth saying at this point that when I say that you can start anywhere, from the point of view of Dzogchen, all the vehicles are available depending on how you are at any time. So it may be that some of the time you are an Anu Yoga practitioner, and some of the time, if you assess your own condition, you need some kind of sutra practice. You need some kind of calming down. So because Dzogchen views us as capable of making those sorts of decisions, and Dzogchen views all of these vehicles as being not only appropriate to the individual, but appropriate to the individual at a point in time, then they're all available for practice. And then if we move on to the very simple presentation of Sutra, Tantra, and Dzogchen, so this is from the Dzogchen point of view, what are the vehicles? Sutra being the vehicle of renunciation, Tantra being the vehicle of transformation, and Dzogchen being the vehicle of self-liberation. Again, this is something we'll go into in more detail in a later teaching. So you can see from this that the traditions of Buddhism have different views about what forms of vehicle. Also, the vehicles will have a different view as to what forms of vehicle. Each will have a different view of each other. Now, from the point of view of the Aro Dzogchen, the Dzogchen view is the most important. So it's the one that says, this is the Dzogchen theory, you're either there or you're not there, and if you're not there, one of the other vehicles is going to be available to you to practice.
Shall I stop sharing?
Yes, that's fine, thank you. So I hope the diagram was helpful, it was readable. So the view of the vehicles, they're a gathering of the teachings. So they bring the teachings together in terms of being compatible with having the same base, the same path, and the same fruit. So it brings together teachings that are helpful to one another. They show a great flexibility of approach in terms of how we embark on practice within Buddhism and what can be appropriate at different times. It gives us an understanding of different teachings in terms of their context and in terms of apparent contradictions. So this is quite important because if you attend teachings in different schools at different times, you will hear different approaches possibly being stated as fact So a primarily sutric teacher will teach about the need for renunciation. If you understand those teachings in that context, then you don't have to try and apply it in the context of your practice if your practice has a different base. But nonetheless, the teachings from any vehicle can be helpful at any time. And so it's very, very useful in overcoming any sense of sectarianism, any sense of superiority, any sense that my vehicle's the right one, your vehicle is the wrong one. And people can just get on well together, in theory, that when somebody else is practicing in a different way, that's their practice, that's their approach, that's the jhana that they're following. They don't have to be wrong, you don't have to be right. And this is really important in maintaining a sense of good-natured appreciation of the practitioners and good-natured appreciation of our own practice as well. You can extend this to other religions. This isn't necessarily an official teaching in any sense, but it seems to work that if somebody is practicing Christianity or Islam, then that's their jhana. Now you'll find that in those religions, what they say they practice is the truth. And from a Buddhist point of view, the idea that they are practicing the truth is a method in itself, because those methods would not work if they weren't thought to be the truth. And that takes me back to where I started in Buddhism. I thought what we were learning was true, and it was the first hearing of the jhanas that tripped me up at that point. Whatever we thought was true in terms of Buddhist practice is expedient in that it's true for the jhana you're practicing in. Move to a different jhana, it's no longer true, but it works in that context. So what I've outlined here is the different approaches from the different traditions, the vehicles that exist within the different vehicles, within the different traditions. And it may sound a bit like, as we used to, going to Woolworths and getting a bowl of pick and mix. That we look at all these things, oh, I like that one, oh, I have a bit of that. In reality, that's not how it works, and that's really not how it could work, because we don't actually understand the internal workings of a vehicle until we're introduced to it and until we're practicing it. And this is where the teacher comes in. And this is somewhere between important and essential on the scale of things. What seems to happen in reality is not that you look at a tradition and go, well, I like the look of that. Or you look at a vehicle and you think, I like the look of that, and then go looking for a teacher. It's more likely to be the case that you'll find a teacher that you resonate with in some fashion, and the jhanas come with them. So when we were studying with a Gelugpa teacher, the Gelugpa approach to jhanas came with them, and everything we did was congruent with that approach. I met with this Gelugpa teacher fortuitously because the center that he taught at was the nearest one to me when I started looking at Buddhism. That's the way it went. And this was also the place where we met Ngakpa Rinpoche for the first time.
And each other.
And each other. So this was very lucky indeed. And it was through our understanding of the Gelugpa approach where, in order to be fully committed in terms of ordination. The ordinations were basically in terms of sutra, in terms of renunciation. You would become a monk or a nun. And that wasn't where we felt, wasn't a condition that we felt moved towards. But through listening to Ngakpa Rinpoche's teaching about how things exist within the context of Nyingma Tantra and within Dzogchen, we realized that the kind of commitment we felt moved towards making existed within that approach. So Ngakpa Rinpoche and later Khandro Dechen became the teachers with whom we resonated, and the yanas came with them, basically. So it's helpful if you were looking for a teacher or looking to go further in terms of Buddhist practice, then finding a teacher who speaks to you in some ways, they will be the exemplars of the tradition that they are in and the yanas that they followed. So if you resonate with the teacher, then it's probably going to be the case that the yanas that they've practiced will be things that you can practice as well. So to conclude, I just wanted to mention an American baseball coach called Yogi Berra. And he was asked whether he wanted his pizza cut into 6 slices or 4. And he said, I wish I could do an accent, but he said, cut it into 4, I'm not hungry enough for 6. And what we have within the view of the yanas are ways of slicing the pizza of Buddhism. Essentially, there's one pizza, and it's sliced in different ways in different traditions, I suppose, depending on your preference and how hungry you are. So there aren't really any contradictions. It is, in fact, an ekayana, which is a single yana, which appears as multiple yanas, because you probably find that easier to digest than trying to take a whole pizza in one go. I think the last thing I'd say is that if you find yourself within a tradition and you find yourself within a yana, and that yana has a base, a path, and a fruit, if you have confidence in that yana, in that approach to practice, don't worry too much about the destination then. If you've established that you're going in the right direction, it's important to enjoy the journey, enjoy every step of the journey in terms of your practice, and not worry about, am I getting closer to my destination? What's that going to be like? That just pulls you away from practice. So we have confidence that the yana is going from here to there, and we practice within that yana, and then we are content to sit or engage in practice in terms of that yana, knowing that we're on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is such a valuable teaching because it means you can read books,
yes,
and not get confused because you can see what yana the book is approaching things.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. Yeah.
There's one example you gave many years ago that I've always loved in terms of this teaching, and that was our glasses. We both wear glasses, but they're a different prescription. The aim of the glasses is for us both to be able to see. But if I put Ngakpa's glasses on, I wouldn't be able to see a thing, and vice versa. So our glasses are method. Their base is that we want to be able to see, the method is whatever the prescription is, and the result is that in theory we can see clearly, but they're not the same. I think it's a bit of a human failing, isn't it? We want everything to slot together and be the same, and they're not.
And I think that I'd forgotten all about that. I think it's a very useful reminder that we don't usually demand that in real life. I want her prescription, you know. It would just be absurd.
Yeah.
So so there you have the idea of Buddha as optician, and here are the prescriptions, and you find one that helps you see better.
Great.
Wonderful.